So this backpack contains a smart telescope. It contains a full-fledged, really, astrophotography platform, and it is called the Vaonis Vespera II. And yes, it is in a specific backpack for it. And, this is what we're going to talk about in this video. And, without further ado, let me get the scope out so I show you how it looks like. It's well protected in this backpack, and it looks like this. It's basically like a small, white, cute, like Apple-ish looking device. And it kind of looks like one of the turrets from the puzzle game Portal or Portal 2, if you know what I'm talking about. There's a ton of other accessories that I'll get into. But first, what is this smart telescope? What does it do? How much does it cost? And at least on paper, how does it compare to something like the Seestar S50 that I have here? So this is effectively a quadruplet refracting telescope. It has inside, this arm basically is one refracting telescope with an aperture that we see at the front of 50 millimeters and a focal length of 250 millimeters for a focal ratio of f5, which is, a good compromise in terms of focal ratio. And as you can see, the arm just like folds onto the telescope itself, and then the base of the telescope that can be attached to a tripod using 3/8 of an inch threads, like standard tripod threads, or you can also buy the telescope with its own tiny, cute little portable tripod. It can rotate as well, so that the telescope, once on a tripod, can rotate horizontally and then move around vertically to point to whatever targets. And it does all of that completely automatically, completely independently. You just tell it what to go and observe via a smartphone app, and it does it. What is very special about this particular telescope is that it contains a sensor called the IMX585 sensor. And that is one of the latest sensors from Sony, and it's a sensor that I absolutely love, and I've been recommending it on the channel for quite a while. I've already reviewed 2 cooled astrophotography cameras with this sensor, and it's been performing exceptionally well for me. And so I was very excited when I saw that the Vaonis Vespera II was using this sensor, because the first version definitely wasn't. And full disclosure, Vaonis sent me this for review. So it is only for review. I will return it to them at the end of this review. I have full editorial control. I can say whatever the heck I want about this telescope. Vaonis, the company making this telescope, had actually reached out to me a year ago and about their Vaonis Vespera version 1. And because of the price, and I'll get to that in a moment, I had told them, I don't see how I can review this, because effectively it's the same thing as this for 3 times the price. And so I had rejected their offer. But when I saw that the second version had the 585 sensor that I love so much, then I reached out to them again and I told them, okay, let me try it. I want it. Let's do it. And so that's what happened. So what is the price of this thing? The price of this is naked, like what I have here. No backpack, no nothing, just the base scope, and you provide your own tripod. It is $1,690 US. It is not cheap. And then on top of that, if you get the version with a small tripod, we'll get into that tripod in a moment, it adds $100 US for $1,790 US. Then you add the backpack, and then we're at $1,960 US. And if you want to really have pretty much everything that the Seestar has, you need to add a light pollution filter that costs $220 US. So it brings us, for a full set that is roughly the equivalent of what comes with the Seestar S50, for $2,200 US in this, whereas the Seestar S50 is basically $500 US. Now going a bit more into what is available. So if you get the version with both the backpack and the tripod, this is basically what we're getting. We are getting a small tripod adapter that we can screw into the base of the telescope, and we are getting 3 tripod legs here that we can then screw inside, and those tripod legs are extendable. So basically, you take the telescope, you add this adapter, and you screw it in, and then you can screw in each of the individual legs. The threads are interesting. They're quite large, which means that to screw in one of the tripod legs, it's like 3 rotations, something like that. Much less than what I had anticipated. And this is what we end up getting. Now it really looks like one of those turrets from Portal. But yeah, we get something that is very usable as long as you have a table or the ground to put it on, and you can change how level this is using those extendable legs. But again, you can also bring your own tripod. And then my sample of the scope, still in the backpack, I had space to put some filters in here that are optional for the telescope. There is a solar filter to observe the sun. We have a light pollution filter, which is very similar to the ZW, like quad band filter, which is also what it is basically in the Seestar S50, integrated within the telescope. And so all of that was fitting into the backpack very well. Oops, sorry, backpack. And the solar filter I'm not super interested in because I'm not so much into solar astronomy. I don't know how much it costs, but you can check it. I'll have, of course, all of the links down below. The light pollution filter, which should work pretty well on most targets, but will work especially well for emission nebula, is I think $220 US. Talking about filters, the way that you set up a filter on this telescope is actually very smart. You can just open the arm, which is actually really nice to be able to do it by hand. You cannot do that with the Seestar S50. And it actually pops off like this directly. This is not a filter, just a placeholder, effectively. And let's say I want to put the light pollution filter, which would be useful to me since I'm in Tokyo, Japan. Very light polluted city. If I open the box, I see the actual filter. I can remove it. It looks like this. And I can simply slot it in nicely and then boop. It's on, very easy to install, and it's actually very easy to install while the scope is moving or pointing at something. It's really easy, and that is a very smart mechanism. Also means that the library of filters can be expanded by Vaonis if they wish to do so. It's nice to have that at the same time because it's a proprietary format. It means you do have to rely on Vaonis to release those new filters. One of the things I noticed as I've been using this telescope is while you slot the filters in, it actually recognizes what filter you have on. I have no idea how it does that, but it does it, which is also pretty cool. Now the whole setup here like that, holding it up, is actually around 5 kilograms compared to Seestar S50, which is roughly 3 kilograms. And this feels, looks, and acts much more advanced, to be honest, and it feels much more robust. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea, once when I was taking the Seestar inside after a night of imaging, I bumped it slightly against the wall, like really just like boop, and the arm broke off. So I've been able to repair it with epoxy, but yeah, that was kind of weird and a bit disappointing to see how fragile the Seestar was. If you're using it, very carefully, it's going to be fine, but I was using it carefully. It's just like I mistakenly poop against the wall and it did not survive until I used epoxy to revive it. I was a bit lucky on that front. The Vaonis Vespera, I did the same boop against the wall with roughly the same strength by mistake. And I did that 3 or 4 times by mistake, and there was no problem whatsoever. So definitely this thing is more robust, more solid than the Seestar S50, at least with that completely unintentional stress test. Sorry, Vaonis, by the way, you give me that to review. I have to do weird stuff to it. So on the scope itself, by the way, we have a tiny little black thing here, which is the USB-C plug, which you can use to charge the telescope while it is imaging. And then we have the on button here, which is a tactile button. You don't need to press it, you just need to touch it. Ooh, very modern. By the way, I was talking about the USB-C that can power the telescope while it is moving. So it's nice to have a mobile battery so you can extend the working hours for this telescope. And honestly, you're going to need it because the advertised battery life is only 4 hours of imaging time with this telescope and the internal battery. And that's a bit on the short side. So that means that ideally, if you're going to go to a dark site to do astrophotography, you would want to bring with you a mobile battery to make the best of the session. So that's a bit of a bummer. Second thing that is a bit of a bummer with this telescope, especially since they basically changed from the Vespera 1 to the Vespera 2 the sensor, and now we have a sensor with much more pixels. Therefore, the images take more space on the internal storage of this telescope. The internal storage, only 25 gigabytes are available to us. This is compared to 64 gigabytes in the Seestar S50. And after a night of imaging, if you're saving all of the raw frames, which I personally like doing because then I can do my processing later on as needed, it's going to be full effectively. So it's fine if you have with you a computer or a smartphone that you can take the files off of the telescope after your session, after your night. And it's very easy to do so. The telescope emits its own Wi-Fi. Once you're connected to the Wi-Fi, you can access the drive on the telescope remotely. I've tried from both my computer and a smartphone, and I was able to pull off the files wirelessly from the telescope. As usual, for all of those smart telescopes, I mentioned a Wi-Fi network. It does not mean internet. The telescope emits its own Wi-Fi for peer-to-peer purposes. It does not require any internet connection to function. Okay, now that we are outside at night with a few stars here and there, we're able to have a deeper look at the telescope as well as the app that controls it, because the app, together with the whole telescope, has a very different philosophy than something like the Seestar S50. We'll see the app is extremely streamlined. There's almost nothing for the user to do besides choosing a target, but it also allows this telescope to become a fully automated astrophotography platform that can take on its own images of multiple targets in a single night. It's pretty miraculous. At the same time, I have seen through the many nights that I've used this that the mechanics of the scope, the tracking is also pretty much perfect. I basically haven't seen it drop frames like the Seestar does, even in high wind. So I've been very impressed with that, and I've also been impressed by the image quality. You'll have a look later on at samples of that. But the stars are very tight, the autofocus is spot on, and it's very obvious that the optics are very, very good, as you would expect for something at that price. Before we go into the app, if you like this kind of review, please consider leaving a like on this video. It really helps the channel out. And also let me know down in the comments what you think of this telescope. Is it overpriced? Is the Seestar good enough for you? What are your thoughts on this? I'll be very interested to hear them. Also, if you want to help the channel out, watching this video until the end helps a lot. This is basically the only measure these days that YouTube looks at. And if you want to support me at no cost to you and you're planning on buying anything from Vaonis, like this telescope, or Amazon, High Point Scientific, Agena Astro, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have down in the description, it helps me out at no cost to you. If you want to help more directly and really sponsor this channel, you can become a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description, or you can join the channel as a member. I say it every time, guys. Those videos would not exist without you. I am so thankful for your generosity. Okay, with that, let's get back to the telescope. So the button should be somewhere there. I'm going to leave it pressed until the white light is continuous, and then that as I release it, it will turn it on. To turn it off, it's actually the same thing. It's not super intuitive, and it's not super documented either. For a while, I had no idea how to actually turn it off using this darn button, but now I understand. It's just long press until I see a static white ring, and then as I release, it will turn off. So that's definitely an interesting approach. I would have preferred, like personally, a real button rather than that touch thingy. Okay, as I launch the app, basically for some reason it always greets me with this screen, so I have to agree to the same end user agreement every single time, but I guess it is what it is. And we have some information about where I am, the type of conditions that I can see, some cool stuff like events that we can be looking forward to, and also how to connect to the telescope, which is by opening the Wi-Fi settings. And you can see I have the Vespera II there, which I can connect to directly from my Wi-Fi settings. Then as I go back, boop, it has noticed that we have the instrument connected to the telescope. And so we could actually initialize the telescope. There's also some cool stuff. You can like drop down to see moonrise, moonset, sunrise, sunset, as well as the day-to-day and also hour-per-hour forecast. It's pretty neat, not game-breaking, but pretty cool. And we can also look at the telescope itself. You can see the storage. There's only 25 gigs available out of the 32 gigs of storage on the telescope overall, which again, I've already said it, I think is far too little. And memory is cheap these days, so I do not understand, especially with the larger sensor and at this price, why they didn't go with more storage. The Vespera Pro, I think, I don't remember the exact name, does have much more
memory space in there, but this is a definite drawback for this telescope. You can also choose whether you are going to be saving raw images and FITS files, and you've noticed that I have this off on the Seestar, on the Dwarf 3, I have this on. Here I have it off simply because of the lack of storage space. It fills in so quickly, but also because the stacked results of Mosaics is insanely good. I have not felt the need at all to be doing my own processing with this telescope. So I feel like almost the raw images are not needed, and we don't really have the space to use them anyway. So you can see I just have the stacking images in JPEG, which don't take that much space, and also the final stacked Mosaic TIFF files in there. There's also some stuff in there like, you know, do you want to autofocus, to have this scope basically autofocus? And yes, absolutely you do. It autofocuses really, really well. And you can also see the status of any multi-night observation, because even with Mosaics, this scope is able to keep stacking the same object over and over again across multiple nights. So it's extremely efficient, and it's another reason why I don't personally feel the need to have like individual FITS files, because this thing can just keep stacking based on what it has already recorded. And you can also acquire raw images for your raw dark frames, flat frames, etc. But again, I haven't felt the need to actually use that because of the high quality of the raw output, of the stacked output from this telescope. Okay, anyway, let's get to it, and we can now initialize the telescope. I'm going to turn off the lights, so I'll probably run out of focus. All sorts of bad stuff will happen to the video, but you know, please bear with me while we initialize this telescope. Okay, so I'm tapping on initialize, and we'll see how this works. You can see the telescope will move around, it will start doing stuff, and as you'll see, it will point fairly high in the sky. It's doing almost no rotation in the azimuth axis, so it's good to have it set up in a way that you know, like roughly in this direction in my case, it's going to have access to some nice night sky. And actually, as I see it, I feel probably the other direction will be better, because here it's going to point probably straight at the moon, which is probably not that awesome. So like that is probably a bit better. So I'm gonna just wait for it to initialize. And now you can see, we see the steps of the initialization here. So it is initializing from my city, Kawasaki, which is actually right next to Tokyo. I'm roughly 1 kilometer, 500 meters away from Tokyo proper. And now it is doing basically the plate solving, double checking that it is pointed, like where it is pointed effectively. So it finds its way in amongst the heavens, exactly like something like the Seestar would do, or the Dwarf 3 would do with its calibration process. Once it's done, it actually starts the autofocus process, and it's very interesting because you can hear the motor from the autofocus process, and it basically runs at intervals, which means it's actually doing a proper V curve in the background. At least I imagine it's doing so. The autofocus is remarkably slow, but also it's remarkably high quality. So I don't mind that it takes so long. But you can see it's taken quite a few seconds already, and we're only at 20%. So you just need to wait until it's done, because I think it's really doing a proper V curve. Okay, now it's done with the autofocus and the initialization. From tapping the initialization button to having the initialization successful, I timed it 3 minutes and 46 seconds. So it's not that bad, although it does feel a bit long compared to something like the Seestar. Okay, so now we can close, and we can do several things. We can look for a target, and when I tap on look for a target, you know, you can register favorites, you can explore your targets. Say like, I want to look at galaxies, what's in there. Yes, there's M31. We could go there, see what's around there. And this thing has a focal length and an aperture that is basically the same as the Seestar S50. So it's 250 millimeters of focal length with an aperture of 50 millimeters, but it is paired, as I was mentioning, with the 585 sensor. So it does have a native field of view that is larger than the Seestar. If I tap on M31 and I tap on advanced, you see that the basic field of view in there actually covers almost all of the galaxy from the get-go. So which means that any mosaics compared to the Seestar, to achieve the same field of view will be, and have been, much more efficient with this telescope than with the Seestar. It just is how it is. This thing needs fewer panels to cover the same field of view as the Seestar does. So you saw me like going to Andromeda, and there I have two options. I have Observe and I have Advanced. Observe will be basically the same thing as the Seestar, where you just don't do any mosaic. You will suffer from field rotation. You'll have all of the usual stuff, but it is, the default simple option which you can use. The problem that I have with this Observe button is that it does not do any dithering in that case. And so you will see, if you pixel peep, some walking noise from the noise patterns that are inherited throughout the image. So you'll see the field rotation there. And this is not the best thing to do if you want to do astrophotography. If you just want to do electronically assisted astronomy, Observe is absolutely perfect. No problem whatsoever. So for instance, I could go to an oldie but goodie like the Dumbbell Nebula. It tells me, you need 30 minutes as a recommended duration. We also see some information, about M27. And it's pretty cool actually to have all of that information available. And you can see it's a different type of philosophy. This is a much chiller experience than something like the Seestar. So let's see what happens when I click on Observe. It will simply, go towards the Dumbbell Nebula, and as it does, it will give us some, fun facts at the same time. And sometimes they're repetitive, but they help pass the time while it's going to that target. So again, you can see that this telescope is not aiming for exactly the same niche of users as the Seestar. I see this kind of telescope as more of a telescope for someone who is just like relaxing after a hard day at work, and they're like sipping some wine and just want to quickly like enjoy the heavens, and they don't want to deal with anything that could potentially go wrong with the hardware, whatever. They just want to tap button, see what's there, and have some fun, right? It's a far more laid back experience, in my opinion, than something like the Seestar. You can see it's doing all of the operations. It's checking the position accuracy. It's been doing some plate solving, and then once it's done, it's going to start doing the light accumulation exactly like the Seestar would do. Another thing that I've noticed, as you know, right now it's on the tracking activation. This tracking activation takes quite a bit of time, and I'm wondering whether it's doing some pretty advanced stuff to remove any backlash at the start, to really make sure that it has the proper tracking of the target, because this is far longer than either the Seestar or the Dwarf 3. But then, as I've said earlier, it tracks much better than either of those telescopes. So there could be some software magic going on there. I don't know for sure. And now it is starting to capture, and as it starts to capture, you will see the view will change in a moment. Okay, and there we go. We have this cool, it's a different target than the Seestar, where we have this animation, and then we will see the Dumbbell Nebula start to appear, obviously through the clouds here, and we already see it. And you see probably what I mean by the good tracking and the good star shapes. Like everything is pinpoint, and there's no besides the clouds, which it cannot do much about. Everything is just, in terms of optics, in terms of mechanics of the telescope, it's just a different level. They're in a different league, very obviously. Now, in terms of the proof is in the pudding kind of stuff as well, we can see the results of that. Although I do think that we are now in the, you pay more per performance increase than what you get with the Seestar. So we are getting into the diminishing returns of the investment. Just like if you're buying a high-end CPU or GPU for your computer, if you go for those high-end stuffs, you are paying more per performance than if you were going for the lower end. But then you need the high end to have that top performance in the first place. So it is what it is, and I believe this is very similar for this telescope. And so this is very easily the simple observation. You see we have a slider also on the right, and this is so that you can actually go back in time and see like, oh, this is how it was with 1 frame, 2 frames, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can see the nebula at the center become more and more visible. I think it's a pretty cool idea, and I'd like to have something like that with the Seestar. And the way that it works actually in the background when you look at the files on the telescope. It saves a file for each step of the stack so it can show it to you each time. Okay, and we're at 3 minutes of imaging on the dumbbell nebula, so it's 10 times less than the recommended amount, but we can see how the stacking is getting better and better, and we are also starting to see the lobes of the nebula on the side in just 3 minutes from my rooftop balcony here in Tokyo, or more strictly speaking in Kawasaki, 1 kilometer away from Tokyo. And it keeps stacking, and that's how it works. It works actually surprisingly well, just like that, with a simple observation. Now I can stop this process and say like, okay, I'm done. Now I want to show you again something like M31. And we can go to the Advanced tab here, and this is where the magic happens, because this is where you have the availability of the mosaic modes. And this unlocks the full mosaic mode, but also dithering for the telescopes. That's why I would always recommend to use mosaic modes rather than the single observation mode if you're going to be processing those images later on. And you can see you can change the field of view as much as you like, and to encompass like the whole galaxy like that, for instance. And I will say something that's really cool with that is, you can just do it on the fly. What I'm missing compared to either the Dwarf 3 or the Seestar S50 is that I would like to see images of the galaxy rather than the overall shape of the galaxy. And this is something that's available in the atlases of both the Seestar and the Dwarf Lab. So it would be nice to have that. Still, you can see you can move the field of view and you can cover the whole galaxy without any issue, despite the relatively long focal length of this telescope. Now, I'll show you some results of mosaics on the computer a bit later, because they are quite impressive, really. But I want to quickly show you what I like the most about this telescope, which is its observation plan mode. Okay, and this goes into this tab here. You have the ability to plan your night. And this is what makes this telescope a completely automated observation platform that can go through multiple targets in one night. So for instance, I can tap on Create a Plan, and now I will double check my location, validate this, and validate the night during which I want to do this observation. I want to call it whatever I want, so I'll just call it Test Plan. And in my case, and I would always recommend you do so as well, you want to make sure that you have the advanced observation enabled, because it lets you use both mosaics as well as multi-night stacking for your plans, which is honestly absolutely amazing. And now you have the ability to choose what you want to image. For instance, I could say that, okay, for the first part of the night, let's say until the nebula is roughly at this altitude here, I will be imaging the dumbbell nebula. I can click on that edit thing to choose my field of view. So I can say mosaic, and I want to have like a square around the nebula. Yeah, that sounds good. And if I want to stack across multiple nights, I have the choice whether to enable or not the multi-night mode. And then I can save that. And so now we have the dumbbell nebula. I validate, and that's for the first period of the night. Then later on, maybe I want to go, I don't know, M31. So M31, you can see when the altitude is above 80 degrees, it's no longer available, because the telescope, just like the Seestar, has trouble tracking above 80 degrees altitude. So I can tap this little arrow icon and say like, okay, after the meridian for Andromeda, I'll want to image from, let's say, almost 10 p.m. to maybe 4 hours later, something like that. Looks cool. I can validate that. And I could add something in the middle. Maybe there's some cool stuff to image. Pac-Man Nebula. Why not put Pac-Man Nebula in the middle? And again, I can choose a mosaic, pop, and say like, okay, I like framing like that. Looks nice. And save that and validate. And I forgot to do the framing for M31, so I can edit that, say it's a mosaic, and there is my framing for M31. There we go. Validate that. And I still have a little bit of night left. What are we going to image for the rest of the night? I could go for the Pleiades for a couple of hours, something like that, right? And tell them like, okay, let's look at the field of view. And yeah, that's also a nice field of view that I'd like to have. Something like, yeah, like this. This is cool. Validate and validate. And then finally, for the ending of the night, I'm going to just search for Horsehead. There it is, Horsehead Nebula. I'm going to select that, and yeah, that looks good to me. Validate. There we go. And now I click save. The plan is saved, and once the telescope is ready, I'll be able to actually run the plan. I've run into an issue, by the way, and this is something I want to ask them, where it tells me the telescope is not connected, and there, suddenly it becomes connected. I can start the plan right now if I tap now, but from time to time it becomes not connected again. So I think there's a small bug there that they need to fix, but not a big deal. And I've used this plan multiple times to do multiple targets in one night in mosaic mode like that, and the results are awesome. Seriously, absolutely awesome. And that is what I most like about this telescope. So you have the very good tracking, the very good optics, and the software that is a different type of approach than something like the Dwarf 3, which is more for advanced users, or like the Seestar, which is more for beginners who want to get their hands dirty. And this one is more for chilling out after a hard day's work. That's how I would categorize it. But the plan feature makes this an astrophotography platform that for lazy people. And I'm the lazy geek, right? So I like that kind of stuff. This is all offset, of course, by a relatively high price. But seriously, those plans with mosaics and the fact that the stacks are so good are quite amazing. So I keep saying that the mosaics are awesome. Let's have a look at those mosaics to show you exactly how good they are. First, let me turn off the telescope. So as I learned, it's a long press, wait until it's a constant light, and then you release. And now it's going to turn off. So let me show you the results of a single night of imaging with this plan, where basically I created the plan just like we did earlier. I clicked on start and I went to bed. So the scope did everything on its own, but note that I had connected it to an external power supply, because obviously with its at most 4 hours of internal battery, that's just not enough for it to run through the night with that plan. So I had connected it with external battery to keep it going through the night. When I woke up, it was turned off, well folded upon itself, and it had saved all of the data that I needed for all of my observations that were done during the night. And I imaged 5 objects from my Tokyo rooftop in one of the most light polluted areas on the planet, all of them using the mosaic mode with a custom framing. And I'm first going to show you something that is somewhat disappointing, and it is this. This is basically what I got straight out of the telescope, like the data that was processed by the telescope. I forgot to open M1. There it is. So we had M33, we had the Bubble Nebula, you can see it at the center here. We had M31 Galaxy, we had the Orion Nebula obviously, and then we had M1, the Crab Nebula. And this is the images as processed by the telescope. And the telescope makes a beginner mistake, which is to crop or to cut the darks far too much, to make the background far too dark. So that's a bit of a bummer. But then, if you're using this telescope with those plans, you will be doing some post-processing anyway, because the telescope makes the TIFF raw files available for you to process. And to give you an idea, this is the folder for the observation that I had, and I can go inside the images. We have all of the stacking step-by-step JPEG files, and then at the very bottom we have this TIFF file that we can open, and that is the raw result of the mosaic. If I do an auto stretch in PixInsight, you can see this is what this gives us. And honestly, the auto stretch of PixInsight does a better job, in my opinion, than the over-aggressive processing in the JPEG that I see. So what I did is, for each of those images, I actually spent 5 minutes, not more, just 5 minutes to process each of them. So for a total of 25 minutes. And this is what I get. So during that night, we spent, I think, a bit less than 1 hour on M31. Then we spent, again, maybe a couple of hours max on the Bubble Nebula. Then we spent a little bit of time, I think, again, 1 hour or less on M33. Then we spent, I think, 1 hour again on M42. And then we spent 1 hour on the Crab Nebula. So you can see the scope was very busy throughout the night. And one of the things that you can notice with those images is that the galaxies don't have that much color. So for instance, compare M31 from the Vespera on the left to M31 from the Dwarf 3 after processing on the right. I have much more colors, and the reason is simple. I used the general purpose light pollution filter on the Vespera for all of my images because I knew I was going to image nebulae like this one, the Crab, and M42. And that filter is very good for nebula. It's basically a dual band filter with very wide band passes. And it means it's not so good for galaxies and broadband objects. But because it's a plan, I cannot unless I stay up all night monitoring what's happening, I cannot basically go and I would need to go and manually change the filter between each target type to get the best result. Obviously, based on this result there with this broadband light pollution filter with less than 1 hour of data, and this dwarf image is basically 5 or even 6 hours of data, I don't quite remember, so we're not really looking at the same thing, but I'm absolutely sure we could get a similar result because after all, this is the 585 sensor, which is a very good sensor. So this still is a limitation of those plans. You have to stick to one filter and one filter only. If you're in a light polluted city, that means that you will use the general purpose filter, which is excellent for nebulae, but not so perfect for galaxies. If you live in anything that's Bortle 6 or better, you probably want to just not use any filter, go for no filter whatsoever. It's inside there's just a UV IR cut filter, and then you will get good results on every type of target. Easier that way. Honestly, all of those are mosaics. They're very large field of views. I mean, note how this is the field of view of the Dwarf 2 that I was able to achieve. And the Seestar with the maximum zoom out gave me this, right? So they have more or less the same field of view for the maximum mosaic of the Seestar and the Dwarf 2. But with the 585 sensor and despite the long focal length of the Vespera, we managed to have such a wide field of view available. The same thing for the Bubble Nebula, which is now very visible when we zoom in. And we also see the lobster claw definitely visible. We see this, whatever that is, I forget the name, and this star cluster, whatever it is, I forget the name as well. But you can see we can enjoy a very wide field of view. Same for the Triangulum galaxy. Again, it suffers from a lack of color due to the fact that we're using this pretty much wideband, dual band light pollution filter. But obviously we get a very good result on M42 for less than 1 hour of data, where we have, everything's visible there. Even the trapezium at the center is visible. That's a good sign, right? That's actually really, really good. And we're starting to see even some nebulosity going away from the nebula as well in this image. And all of that, those 5 targets in a single night again. Now, if I zoom into, I wanted to see also what's going to happen for a very small target like the Crab Nebula. And I zoom in, and we do see quite a few details within the Crab Nebula, which actually surprised me to some extent. It's not the best image ever, but for something that was just basically an hour before the sun rose and completely automated, I didn't have to do anything besides tap a button, that's pretty decent. I also want to show you quickly the processing that I did on another image taken by the Vespera II, which is this one. Again, this is a field of view that is impossible with, I believe, any other smart telescope right now. It's encompassing the whole of the Veil Nebula from east to west. Everything. We have all of that insane supernova remnant in a single field of view. This was 4 hours of data. With a mosaic taken by the Vespera, again, just setting the mosaic, clicking start, and then going to bed. Okay, so I think this gives a pretty good overview of the telescope, which obviously seems to have a completely different philosophy than the Seestar S50. It is basically, for its base model, 3 times the price. And if you want to have all of the bells and whistles, you go to 4 times the price. So would you buy 1 Vespera 2 or 4 Seestars? It kind of becomes the question. At the same time, the Vespera 2, it's obviously better built. It's metal construction, very difficult to break, very good optics. The Mosaic mode is insane, the plans are really good, and of course the sensor inside is much better with the 585. It's also made in France, effectively. So they import parts from multiple countries, but it's all assembled by hand in France. So yeah, you have a bit of the labor costs that are included in the Vespera 2. And it's really the software approach. The app is, again, I said it multiple times, but it's basically a chill out kind of approach at the end of the day, just like view some targets and relax. And if you want to, you do this whole planned observation where the Vespera 2 will do everything for you throughout the night. On the other hand, the Seestar is definitely lower build quality, but it also works excellently. So it's always very difficult to justify getting something like the Vaonis Vespera II compared to the much cheaper Seestar unless you have some specific objectives in mind and you want the best build quality, the best tracking, the best optics, and then in terms of mosaics and field of view, the best mosaics and field of view. You are sacrificing a lot in terms of price, obviously. You're also sacrificing in terms of internal memory, also battery life is inferior on the Vaonis Vespera II, which I think is personally a missed opportunity. Those two should have been remedied, especially the storage space. If funds and money was no object, I would probably buy the Vespera II over the Seestar simply because of those automated plans where I can just let it do its work. I can choose the framing myself. I can go to dark areas just like the Seestar, and I would complement it with the Dwarf 3, exactly as I have for the Seestar and Dwarf 3 that are complementing each other in my equipment. But anyway, you saw in this video, I think I presented as objectively as possible the strengths and weaknesses of this telescope compared to other smart telescopes as well. And it is now up to you to make your own choice. If you're interested in buying this Vaonis Vespera or any other smart telescope for that matter, I have links down in the description. And if you buy anything using one of those links, whether it's one of those smart telescopes or anything else from Amazon, High Point Scientific, Agena, etc., it will help me out at no additional cost to you. If you want to support the channel as well, you can like the video, it really helps out. And also you can let me know down in the comments what you think about this smart telescope. Is it just too expensive for what it is? Or does it justify its price with its additional build quality and features? I'll be very interested to know what you think. And if you want to help support the channel and sponsor this channel, make it still possible for me to do such in-depth reviews of equipment and also instructional videos in astrophotography, you can join the channel as a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description, or join as a member using the join button next to the subscribe button. This channel would not exist without my supporters, and they will be in the list of credits at the end of this video. With that, thank you so much for watching till the end. I hope this was interesting and useful to you guys. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.